Hello, you're watching Talking Europe on France 24. I'm Catherine Nicholson. Now, today we're focusing on human rights with the new head of Europe's leading human rights organisation, the Council of Europe. Marija Pejcinovic Buric, our guest today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Our viewers will certainly know of the Council of Europe's work, I'm sure, but they're maybe not completely familiar with the organisation itself. So I'll just give a brief introduction for our viewers. Now, the Council of Europe has 47 members, including all of the European Union's member states and some neighbours as well, like Georgia, Azerbaijan and notably Russia. Now, all of them have signed and ratified the European Convention on Human Rights. That means their citizens can take human rights cases to the European Court of Human Rights if they've already tried all other judicial avenues in their home state. So, Marija Pejcinovic Buric, as I said, this is a new job for you, Secretary General of this rather vast organisation. Until this summer, you were First Deputy Prime Minister of Croatia. What are your priorities now that you're leading the Council of Europe?
Well, of course, priorities is to continue with reforms. That's for more internal work of the Council of Europe, because the organization needs to meet the priorities of the 21st century. But in general, on substance, this is to address with more vigor all the recurring trends in that unfortunately are still present in a number of our member states, starting from corruption to threat to independence of judiciary, to media freedom, journalists, human rights defenders, hate speech, including anti-Semitic speech. So there are a lot what is the core of work of Council of Europe to be done with more vigor on that. My particular priority would be for equality issues and battle against discrimination in all kinds, and also work on protecting children, in particular in view of the Lanzarote Convention, which is set for sexual abuse on children. So my priorities are quite clear. And of course, some new priorities that are like artificial intelligence from Council of Europe point of view, related to human rights and protection of social values also, because that sometimes means that especially feminine work employment is endangered. So a lot to do for the Council of Europe and for the Secretary General.
Absolutely. I mean, human rights is such a vast subject area to try and cover, particularly in one short interview, but we'll try and get through some of the key issues. I'd like to talk first about recent or ongoing events involving one of your members, Turkey. European leaders have condemned the incursion in Northern Syria by the Turkish military and the Syrian combatants that Turkey is backing. Now, about 170,000 people were said to have been displaced just in the first few days of this going on. How concerned are you about the human rights situation that's being provoked in Northern Syria?
Yeah, well, Syria is not in direct remit of the Council of Europe, and military security also is not within the work of the Council of Europe. That's for other international organizations to do. But what we are concerned with is the refugee. You mentioned numbers. We have also UN numbers that say that it's 175 or 6,000 people, and among them 80,000 children. And in the Council of Europe, we pay attention to most vulnerable groups, and within refugees, children are certainly those who are the most vulnerable. So what the Council of Europe has put in place, it's kind of action plan protecting children, because they found themselves in all kind of difficult situations where they need to be protected from the human rights point of view.
And as I said, Turkey, which is leading this military incursion, a member of the Council of Europe, could there be sanctions for Turkey for provoking clearly what you see as a human rights crisis, at the very least for these displaced people, for these children?
As I say, we don't deal with military security issues, but rather with the human security issues. So We are concerned, we are watching. I think good development is that there is a ceasefire that is prolonged, and also that Turkey announced that is no longer taking military action. So I think now we need to focus our work on refugees and in particular on children refugees.
Moving on to another of your members, Russia, a country that had its voting rights suspended in 2014 after it annexed Crimea in Ukraine. 2/3 of the Council's members voted to reinstate Russia this June. But the Council's members clearly are split on this. That situation is still the case now. Do you agree that Russia should have been reinstated as a full member?
You know, first, what is important to reinstate is that the Council of Europe position on Crimea didn't change, so it's illegal annexation. However, what was important and that the organization was dragged into unprecedented political, institutional, and at the end also financial crisis was a duty, because there was not Russia was not present in the Parliamentary Assembly, but continues to work within other parts of the organization. So we needed to remedy that situation, and the only solution that was possible was to get a long Parliamentary Assembly and Committee of Ministers as two statutory bodies to work together. And there were a number of resolutions and decisions taken by both bodies that led to a majority of countries taking that path to reintegrate the get back Russian delegation to.
Well, just to say, it is certainly a majority,
to the work of the Parliamentary Assembly.
But yeah, for example, Ukraine and several other countries claiming perhaps that this sets a bit of a bad precedent. The Ukrainian representative said, do what you want, annex another country's territory, kill people there, but you will still leave with everything, claiming that lifting this kind of sanction, it just gives Russia some impunity, or any other country.
You know, Council of Europe was really going into either split and then be another organization, which was not the main aim when it was created 70 years ago, for unity and for dialogue in Europe. So dialogue-based institution needs to maintain dialogue within its bodies and within the member states. So the position of majority of member states was that pan-European nature of Council of Europe should be preserved, and that is within the democratic institutions, which is Parliamentary Assembly, Committee of Ministers, to discuss all pertaining issues. So I think we need dialogue with the Russian Federation on all issues, and the best place to have that dialogue is within the system. So that was the decision that was taken by the Ministers of Foreign Affairs in Helsinki last May, and that was also a decision taken by the Parliamentary Assembly. And based on that, now the two bodies and the Secretary General work on new mechanism that would actually, in the future, prevent such a crisis and such a situation where two parts of the organization would not act in dialogue and in close cooperation. So we are now setting up hopefully very soon this mechanism that will allow this Council of Europe to have a coherent approach to a possible new situation of violation of statutes.
Well, you've just answered a question that I was going to ask you. Will the rules be changing? So let's move on to another very pressing topic for the Council of Europe and for many countries.
Well,
the issue of violence against women as well.
Yes,
I'd like
it's
to
underway.
Talk about that. It's underway. We're running out of time, unfortunately, so I'd like to talk about violence against women. It's been a massive topic here in France recently, with a big push by the government and agencies to kind of toughen up the rules about domestic violence. And your members are supposed to be ratifying something called the Istanbul Convention. It's the first international treaty that legally defines violence against women and the minimum standards to be expected in combating it. So I've got a report that I'd really like to show you and our viewers about how one of the member states that's ratified the treaty is dealing with this. We're talking about Spain. Now, Spain has made a whole swathe of reforms over many years on this issue. It is seen as somewhat of an example in some areas. France 24's Melina Huet and Sarah Morris went into one of the special domestic violence courts to find out more.
You're appearing here as the victim of an alleged crime of mistreatment committed by your husband.
This is one of the specialist courts set up in 2004, dedicated to cases of violence against women by their partners.
Can you explain to us what happened yesterday at your home?
Él comenzó a insultarme por la noche. Me cogió de aquí del pelo y del cuello y me tiró hacia adelante.
Are you afraid of your husband? Would you like protective measures to be implemented to prevent him from coming close to you?
In Spain, once a complaint is brought, judges trained in violence against women have a maximum of 72 hours to process the case. They must hear evidence from the alleged victim and the accused.
You didn't touch your wife. Had you been drinking? Do you have an alcohol problem?
Adjourned to the following morning in order to hear from the couple's daughter. Until then, the husband is remanded in custody. If the judge finds sufficient evidence, a quick trial will be organised within 15 days in these same courts.
You're accused of making threats within the household. You can, if you like, accept the facts of the case. Duly noted. Do you also accept the sentence proposed by the prosecutor for that instance, community service?
When the evidence is overwhelming, often the defendant pleads guilty before the trial even begins and has his sentence reduced. But preventative measures are taken to protect the victim.
The most important thing to keep in mind is that for the next 6 months, he cannot get near you nor contact you.
If the man breaches the order, his sentence could be changed to a jail term. The law sets out stiffer sentences for crimes involving this type of abuse.
If these threats had taken place outside a relationship or a household, we'd be dealing with a minor crime. And if the victim hadn't filed a complaint, there would have been no trial. But this case here is different. These threats fall under a special category called violence against a woman in a relationship. And this means the victim doesn't have to file a complaint. The state acts directly on her behalf.
All right, one example there from Spain of how the situation, the judicial situation, the laws and the frameworks are changing regarding domestic violence. Marija Pejcinovic Buric, one of the countries that has not yet ratified the Istanbul Convention is the United Kingdom, a founder member of the Council of Europe, of course one of the world's richest countries as well, and a country that likes to see itself as a leader on human rights issues. How big of a problem is it, do you think, that the UK is seen as dragging its feet on this?
Well, in general, let me say that out of 47, there are 45 that have signed the Istanbul Convention, and so far 34 that have ratified. And indeed, in the last 2 years, in 10 of our member states, it entered into force. It is actually some of the countries that haven't yet ratified the convention. The issue is sometimes posed the relation between Istanbul Convention and the national constitution, or in some there are misconceptions about what is real meaning and real provisions in the Istanbul Convention. And let me say, because the full name of the convention is Convention against Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, so that speaks by itself. The convention is there for two purposes: to protect, to prevent, to protect the victims, and then to prosecute the perpetrators. So nothing more, nothing less than that. But unfortunately, in the discourse in some countries, there are misconceptions which are based on just basic, not truth, talking about something which doesn't entail ratification of this very unique golden standard for protecting women against violence. And let me say that no place in the world is a safe place for women against domestic violence and domestic violence. So we certainly need, even in more very developed countries, to have a better standard, in particular from what we've seen from your just in Spain, especially judiciary and the police and the interagency work internally needs to be better coordinated and enhanced.
As I said, the United Kingdom, one of the countries that hasn't yet ratified the Istanbul Convention. And there have been other concerns for human rights defenders in the United Kingdom, particularly in the context of Brexit, the UK leaving the EU. The government has not given assurances that it's not going to repeal or replace its own Human Rights Act once it's left the EU. Are you concerned that the UK could be about to dilute its own human rights?
You know, the European Convention on Human Rights is the convention out of 220 that the Council of Europe has over 70 years developed. And this is the first convention, actually, our whole Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg is based on that it provides the possibility for every citizens of our member states of Europe, almost excluding Belarus, to have access to the court if they are not happy with their domestic legislation. So we believe it's upholding the best standard in the world on human rights. So we believe that the UK, as a founder of the Council of Europe, will remain faithful to the convention and to excellent work that is done by the European Court of Human Rights. And I don't see that Brexit should directly impact on that.
Would you be asking for assurances from the UK on that, very briefly?
For me, for Secretary General, the convention system, and in particular this Convention on Human Rights, is the most important. So part of my mandate will be certainly to ask to uphold the values that are in the convention, and indeed it's up to member states, to national institutions to be aligned with the provisions of this convention. And it's only when it is not upheld that the European Court on Human Rights is on stage, and then they go about it.
All right, unfortunately we are out of time, but thank you so much for speaking to us, Marija Pejcinovic Buric, the newly appointed Secretary General of the Council of Europe. Thanks very much. Well, thanks to you as well for watching Talking Europe. Do stay tuned.